where his father had stayed in the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah, the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had borne to him in his old age, and he made a richly ornamented robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to them, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars are bowing down to me." When he told his father, as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, "As you know, your brothers are grazing the fields near Shechem. Come, I am going to send you to them." "Very well," he replied. So he said to them, "Go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me." Then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering around in the fields and asked him, "What are you looking for?" He replied, "I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing their flocks?" "They have moved on from here," the man answered. "I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. Here comes the dreamer," they said to each other. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of those cisterns, and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. "Let's not take his life," he said. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into the cistern here in the desert, but don't lay a hand on him." Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, and the richly ornamented robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into a cistern. Now the cistern was empty. There was no water in it. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of the Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he's our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brother pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, "The boy isn't there. Where can I turn now?" They got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They took the ornamented robe back to their father and said, "We found this. Examine to see whether it is your son's robe." He recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "No," he said, "in mourning will I go down to the grave, to my son." So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. ヤコブが父が一時滞在していた地、カナンの地に住んでいた。これはヤコブの歴史である。ヨセフは17歳の時、彼の兄たちと羊の群れと飼っていた。彼はまだ手伝いで、父の妻ビルハの子らやジルパの子らと一緒にいた。ヨセフは彼らの悪い噂を父に告げた。イスラエルは彼の息子たちの誰よりもヨセフを愛していた。それはヨセフが彼の年寄り子であったからである。それで彼はヨセフに袖付きの長服を作ってやっていた。 彼の兄たちは、父が兄弟たちの誰よりも彼を愛しているのを見て、彼を憎み、彼と穏やかに話すことができなかった。ある時、ヨセフは夢を見て、それを兄たちに告げた。すると、彼らはますます彼を憎むようになった。ヨセフは彼らに言った。どうか私を見た夢を聞いてください。見ると私は畑で束を束ねていました。すると突然、私の束が立ち上がり、しかもまっすぐに立っているのです。見ると、あなた方の束が周りに来て、私の束にお辞儀をしました。兄たちは彼に言った。お前は私を治める王になろうとするのか、私たちを支配しようとでも言うのか。こうして彼らは夢のことや言葉のことで彼をますます憎むようになった。ヨセフはまた他の夢を見て、それを兄たちに話した。彼はまた私は夢を見ましたよ。見ると太陽と月と11の星が私を伏して拝んでいるのですと言った。ヨセフが父や兄たちに話したとき、父は彼を叱っていった。お前の見た夢は一体何なのだ。私はお前の母親、お兄さんがお前のところに住み出て、地に伏してお前を拝むとでも言うのか。兄たちは彼を妬んだが、父はこのことを心に留めていた。その後、兄たちはシケムで父の羊の群れを飼うために出かけていった。それでイスラエルはヨセフに言った。お前のお兄さんたちはシゲムで群れを飼っている。さあ、あの人たちのところに使いに行ってもらいたい。すると答えた。はい、参ります。また言った。さあ行って、お兄さんたちや羊の群れが無事であるかを見て、そのことを私に知らせに帰ってきておくれ。こうして彼をヘブロンの谷から使いにやった。それで彼はシケムに行った。彼がさまよっていると、一人の人が彼に出会った。その人は尋ねて言った。何を探しているのですか。ヨセフは言った。私は兄たちを探しているところです。どこで群れを飼っているのか教えてください。するとその人は言った。ここからはもう立っていったはずです。あの人たちがダンの方に行こうではないかと言っているのを私は聞いたからです。それでヨセフは兄たちの後を追っていき、ドランで彼らを見つけた。彼らはヨセフが彼らの近くに来ないうちに、はるか彼方に彼を見て彼を殺そうと企んだ。彼らは互いに言った。見ろ、あの夢見る者がやってくる。さあ、今こそ彼を殺し、どこかの穴に投げ込んで悪い獣が食い殺したと言おう。そしてあれの夢がどうなるのか見ようではないか。しかしルベンはこれを聞き、彼らの手から彼を救い出そうとして、あの子の命を撃ってはならないと言った。ルベンはさらに血を流してはならない。彼は穴のこの穴に投げ込みなさい。彼に手を下してはならない。ヨセフを彼らの手から救い出し、父のところに返すためであった。ヨセフが兄たちのところに来たとき、彼らはヨセフの長服、彼が着ていた袖付きの長服を剥ぎ取り、彼を捕らえて穴の中に投げ込んだ。その穴は空で、その中には水がなかった。それから彼らは座って食事をした。彼らは目を上げてみると、そこにイシュマエル人の大将がギルアレから来ていた。ラクダには主攻と入港と持つ役を背負わせ、彼らはエジプトへ下っていくところであった。するとユダが兄弟たちに言った。弟を殺し、その血を隠したことで何の益になろう。さあ、ヨセフをイシュマエル人に売ろう。我々が彼に手をかけてはならない。彼は我々の肉親の弟だから、兄弟たちは彼の言うことを聞き入れた。その時、ミディアン人の証人が通りかかった。それで彼らはヨセフの穴から引き上げ、ヨセフを銀20枚でイシュマエル人に売った。イシュマエル人はヨセフをエジプトへ連れて行った。さて、ルベンが穴のところに帰ってくると、なんとヨセフは穴の中にいなかった。彼は自分の着物を引き裂き、兄弟たちのところに戻っていった。あの子がいない。ああ、私はどこへ行ったらよいのか。彼らはヨセフの長服を取り、親木をほぶって、その血にその長服を浸した。そして、その袖付きの長服を父のところに持って行き、彼らはこれを私たちが見つけました。どうかあなたのこの長服であるかどうかお調べになってくださいと言った。父はそれを調べて言った。これは我が子の長服だ。悪い獣に焼いたのだ。ヨセフが噛み裂かれたのだ。ヤコブは自分の着物を引き裂き、 天布を腰にまとい、幾日もの間、その子のために泣き悲しんだ。彼の息子、娘たちが皆来て、父を慰めたが、彼は慰めることを拒み、私は泣き悲しみながら、読みにいる我が子のところに下っていきたいと言った。こうして父はその子のために泣いた。ミディアン人はエジプトでパロの帝臣、その侍従長ポテフルにヨセフを売った。At that time, Joseph left his brothers and went down to stay with the man of Adullam named Hera. There Judah met the daughter of the Canaanite woman named Shua. He married her and lay with her. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son, who was named She conceived again and gave birth to a son and named him Onan. She gave birth to still another son and named him Salah. It was Kezib that she gave birth to him. Judah got a wife for his firstborn. Her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked to the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, lie with your brother's wife, and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law, to produce your offspring for your brother. But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. So whenever he lay with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from producing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so he put him to death also. Judah then said to his sister-in-law, Tamar, live now as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up. For he thought, he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live within his father's house. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. When Judah recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah to the men who were shearing sheep, and his friend Hira the Adullamite went with him. When Tamar was told, your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear the sheep, she took off her widow's clothes and covered him with a veil to disguise herself. Then it sat down at the entrance of Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah, for she saw that through Salah, though Salah had now grown up, she had not been given to him as his wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Not realizing she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, come now, let me sleep with you. And what will you give me to sleep with you? She asked. I'll send you a young goat from my flock, he said. Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it? She said. He said, what pledge should I give you? Your seal and its cord, and the staff in your hand, she answered. So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. After she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again. Meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend, the Adullamite, in order to get his pledge back from the woman, but he did not find her. He asked the man who lived there, where is the shrine prostitute who was beside the road at Enaim? There hasn't been any shrine prostitute here, they said. So they went back to Judah and said, I didn't find her. Besides, the man who lived there said, there hasn't been any shrine prostitute here. Then Judah said, let's keep what she has, or we will become a laughingstock. After all, I did send her this young goat, but you didn't find her. About 3 months later, Judah was told, your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant. Judah said, bring her out and have her burned to death. She was being brought out. She sent a messenger to her father-in-law. I am pregnant by a man who owns these, she said, and she added, see if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are. Judah recognized them and said, she is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Salah, and he did not sleep with her again. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. She was giving birth. One of them put out his hand. So the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it on his wrist and said, this one came out first. But when he drew back his hand, his brother came out, and she said, so this is how you have broken out. And he was named Perez. Then his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his wrist, came out, and he was given the name Zillah. その頃のことであった。イラは兄弟たちから離れて下っていき、その名をヒラというアドラム人の近くで天幕があった。そこでイラはあるカナン人、その名をシュアという人の娘を見初め、彼女をめとって彼女のところに入った。彼女は身ごもり男の子を産んだ。彼はその子をエルと名付けた。彼女はまた身ごもって男の子を産み、その子をオナンと名付けた。彼女はさらにまた男の子を産み、その子をシュラと名付けた。 彼女がシュラを産んだとき、彼はゲジブにいた。ユダはその長子エルにタマルという妻を迎えた。しかしユダの長子エルは主を怒らせたので、主は彼を殺した。それでユダはオナに言った。あなたには兄嫁のところに入り、儀礼として務めを果たしなさい。そしてあなたの兄のために子孫を起こすようにしなさい。しかし、オナンは、そう生まれる子が自分のものとならないのを知っていたので、兄に子孫を与えないために、兄嫁のところに入ると血に流していた。彼のしたことは主に怒らせたので、主は彼を殺した。そこでイラは嫁タマルに、我が子シラが成人するまでは、あなたの父の家でやもめのままでいなさいと言った。またシラもまた、兄たちのように死ぬといけないと思ったからである。タマルは父の家に行き、そこに住むようになった。かなり日が経って、シュアの娘であったイラの妻が死んだ。そうもが明けたとき、ユダは、羊の群れの木を切るために、その友人でアドラム人のヒラと一緒に、テムナへ登っていった。その時、タマルにご覧、あなたの舅が羊の毛を切るために、テムナに行って、登ってきますよ、と告げるものであった。それでタマルはやもめの服を脱ぎ、ベールをかぶり、着替えをして、テムナへの道にあるエナイムの入り口に座っていた。それはシュラが成人したのに、自分はその妻にされないのを知っていたからである。イラは彼女を見たとき、彼女は顔を覆っていたので、遊女だと思い、道端の彼女のところに行き、さあ、あなたのところに入ろうと言った。彼はその女のが自分の嫁だと知らなかったからである。彼女は私のところにお入りになれば私にくださいますかと言った。彼が胸の中から小焼を送ろうと言うと、彼女はそれを送ってくださるまで何かお印をくださればと言った。それで彼が印として何をあげようかというと、あなたの引形と紐とあなたが手にしている杖と答えた。それで彼はそれを与えて彼女のところに入った。こうしてタマルは彼によって身ごもった。彼女は立ち去ってそのベールを外し、またやもめの服を着た。イラは彼女の手から印を取り戻そうと、アルラム人の友人に託して小ヤギを送ったが、彼はその女を見つけることはできなかった。その友人はその人々に尋ねて、エナイムの道端にいた遊女はどこにいますかと言うと、彼らはここには遊女はいたことはないと答えた。それで彼はユダのところに帰ってきて言った。あの女は見つかりませんでした。あそこの人たちも、ここには遊女はいたことはないと言いました。ユダは言った。我々は笑いぐざにならないために、あの女にそのまま取らせよう。私はこの通り、この小ヤギを送ったのに、あなたがあの女を見つけなかったのだから、約3ヶ月してユダに、あなたの嫁タマルが買収をし、それをお聞きください。その買収によって身ごもっているのです。続けるものがあった。そこでユダは、あの女を引き出して焼き殺せ。彼女は引き出されたとき、彼女はシュートのところに使いをやり、これらの品々の持ち主によって私を身ごもったのですと言わせた。そしてまた彼女は言った。これらの引形と紐と杖とが、誰のものかをお調べください。イラはこれを見定めていった。あの女は私よりも正しい。私が彼女に我が子シラを与えなかったことによるものだ。それで彼は再び彼女を指導とはしなかった。彼女は出産の時になると、なんと双子がその体内にいた。出産の時、一つの手が出てきたので、助産婦はそれをつかみ、その手に真っ赤な糸を結びついていった。この子は最初に出てきたのです。しかし、その子が手を引き込めたとき、もう一人の兄弟の方が出てきた。それで彼女は、あなたはなんであなたのために割り込むのですと言った。それでその名はペレツと呼ばれた。その後で真っ赤な糸をつけたもう一人の、兄弟が出てきた。それでその名はゼラフと呼ばれた。Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, the Egyptian, who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, brought him from the Ishmaelites who had been taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From that time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned. The Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So he left Joseph's care everything he had, with Joseph in charge. He did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. "With me in charge," he told her. "My master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. Then how could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day he went into the house and to attend his duties, and none of his household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew has been brought to us to make a sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." She kept his cloak beside her until his master came home. She told him this story. "That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make sport of me, but as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." When his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me." He burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. He showed kindness and granted him favor in his eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. ヨセフがエジプトへ連れて行かれたとき、パロの帝人の侍従長のポテファルという一人のエジプト人がヨセフのところに連れてきたエシュマエル人の手からヨセフを買い取った。じゃあヨセフと共におられたので、彼は幸運な人となり、そのエジプト人の主人の家にいた。彼の主人は、主が彼と共におられ、主が彼のすることすべてを成功させてくださるのを見た。聖ヨセフは主人のこのことのほか愛され、主人は彼を側近のものとし、その家の管理させ、彼の全財産をヨセフの手に委ねた。主人が彼にその家と全財産と管理させた時から、主はヨセフのゆえに、このエジプト人の家を祝福された。それで主の祝福が家の野にある全財産の上にあった。彼はヨセフの手に全財産を委ね、自分の食べる植物以外には、何も気を使わなかった。しかもヨセフは体格も良く美男子であった。これらのことの後、主人の妻はヨセフに目をつけて、私と寝ておくれと言った。しかし彼は拒んで、主人の妻に言った。ご覧ください。私の主人は家の中のことは何でも私に任せ、気を使わず全財産を私の手に委ねられました。ご主人はこの家の中では私より大きな権威を振るおうとはされず、あなた以外には何も私に差し止めてはおられません。あなたはご主人の奥様だからです。どうしてそのような大きな悪事をして私は神に罪を犯すことはできましょうか。それでも彼女は毎日ヨセフに酔ったが、彼は聞き入れず、彼女のそばに寝ることも、彼女と一緒にいることもしなかった。ある日、彼が仕事をしようとして家に入ると、家の中には家の者どもが一人もそこにいなかった。それで彼女はヨセフの上着を掴んで、私と寝ておくれと言った。しかしヨセフはその上着を彼女の手に残し、逃げて外へ出た。彼が上着を彼女の手に残して外へ逃げたのを見ると、彼女はその家どもを呼び寄せ、彼らにこう言った。こら、主人は私たちを持って もて遊ぶためにヘブル人を私のところに連れ込んだのです。あの男は私と寝ようとして入ってきたので、私は大声で上げたのです。私が声を上げて叫んだのを聞いて、あの男は私のそばに自分の上着を残し、逃げて外へ出て行きました。彼女は主人が家に帰ってくるまで、その上着を自分のそばに置いていた。こうして彼女は主人にこのように告げていった。あなたが私たちのところに連れて来られたヘブル人の奴隷は、私にいたずらをしようとして私のところに入ってきました。私が声を上げて叫んだので、私のそばに上着を残して外へ逃げました。主人は妻があなたの奴隷は私にこのようなことをしたのですと言って、そういった言葉を聞いて怒りに燃えた。ヨセフの主人は彼を捕らえ、王の囚人が監禁されている監獄の彼に彼を入れた。こうして彼は監獄にいた。しかし、主はヨセフと共におられ、彼に恵みを施し、監獄の長の心にかなうようにされた。それで監獄の長は、その監獄にいるすべての囚人をヨセフの手に委ねた。ヨセフはそこでなさるすべてのことを管理するようになった。監獄の長はヨセフの手に任せたことについては何も干渉しなかった。それは主が彼と共におられ、彼が何をしても主がそれを成功させてくださったからである。Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king in Egypt offered their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, and there was in the same prison where Joseph was confined. And the captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. After they had been in custody for some time there, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials, who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why are your faces so sad today?" "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there is no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dream." So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, "In a dream I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand. This is what it means," Joseph said to them. "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were with his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison, for I was forcibly carried from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon." When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he said to Joseph, I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. On the top baskets were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. "This is what it means," Joseph said. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and hang you on the tree. The birds will eat away your flesh." Now the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. これらのことの後、エジプト人の王、検察官と調理官とがその主君エジプトの王に罪を犯した。それでパロはこの検察官長と調理官長の2人の挺身を怒り、彼らを侍従長の家に拘留した。すなわちヨセフが監禁されている同じ監獄に入れた。侍従長はヨセフを彼らの付き人にしたので、彼はその世話をした。こうして彼らはしばらく拘留されていた。さて、監獄に監禁されているエジプトの王、検察長と管理長とは2人とも同じ夜にそれを それぞれ夢を見た。その夢には、おのおの意味があった。朝、ヨセフが彼らのところに行ってよく見ると、彼はイライラしていた。それで彼は自分の主人の家に一緒に交流されているすべてのパロの帝臣たちに尋ねて、なぜ今日はあなた方の顔色が悪いのですかと言った。二人は彼に言った。私は夢を見たが、それを解き明かす人がいない。ヨセフは彼に言った。それを解き明かすことは神のなさうことではありませんか。さあ、それを私に話してください。それで、検釈官長はヨセフに自分の夢を話していった。夢の中で見ると、私の前に一本のブドウの木があった。そのブドウの木には三本のつるがあった。それが芽を出すとすぐ花が咲き、ブドウの房が熟してブドウになった。私の手にはパロの杯があったから、私はそのブドウを掴んで、それをパロの杯の中に絞って入れ、その杯をパロの手に捧げた。ヨセフは彼に言った。その解き明かしはこうです。三本の鶴は三日のことです。三日のうちにパロはあなたを呼び出し、あなたをの元の地位に戻すでしょう。あなたはパロの検釈官であった時の以前の規定に従って、パロの杯をその手に捧げましょう。あなたは幸せになった時には、きっと私を思い出してください。私に恵みを施してください。私のことをパロに話してください。この家から私が出られるようにしてください。実は私はヘブル人の国からさらわれてきたのです。ここでも私は投獄されるようなことは何もしていないのです。調理官長は解き明かしは良かったのを見てヨセフに言った。私も夢の中で見ると、私の頭の上に枝編みのカゴが3つあった。一番上のカゴにはパロのために調理官が作ったあらゆる食べ物が入っていたが、鳥が私の頭の上のカゴの中からそれを食べてしまった。ヨセフは答えていった。その解き明かしはこうです。3つのカゴは3日のことです。3日のうちにパロはあなたを呼び出し、あなたを火に通し、鳥があなたの肉をむしり取って食うでしょう。3日目にパロの誕生日であった。それで彼は自分のすべての家臣たちのために祝宴を張り、検釈官長と調理官長とその検診たちの中に呼び出した。そして検釈官長とその検釈の役に戻したので、彼はその杯をパロの手に捧げた。しかしパロはヨセフの解き明かしたように、調理官長を木に吊るした。ところが検釈官長はヨセフのことを思い出さず、彼のことを忘れてしまった。